Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Tyler Tachman of the Des Moines Register is here with me with Big Ten rosters mostly set for the 2024-25 men's basketball season. I pulled up the Bart Torvik rankings, the projections for next season, and we're going to actually go through maybe not every team. We're going to try to hit every team and do some buy or sell for that team and their ranking for next season. Tyler, welcome back to Podcast on the Brink. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. My question for you is, what would the Bart Torvik ranking be on Disney? Because I know you just got back from there. What is that, a top 20, top 15? I need
Top
an
five.
Evaluation.
Top
five. Wow.
Top five.
Okay.
Bye. Top five. How's the offseason going there in Iowa City? Obviously, there's been some news for Iowa recently with Peyton Sandfort coming back next season. What's been kind of the general buzz around that program? I know we're going to get into Iowa a little bit later, but just in general, give me a quick overview of how the offseason's gone.
I think it's gone well for Iowa. Being able to retain Owen Freeman, Josh Dix, and kind of the young core was really big. And then kind of the biggest domino to fall was Payne Sandfort coming back, who he went through the pre-draft process, but he's coming back for his senior season and will enter as one of the best players in the Big Ten. And then a pair of transfers who I think will be good fit. Seydou Traore from Manhattan, just really athletic, 6'7". Maybe the biggest part of his game that can translate is the defensive end, which we all know that Iowa has struggled with. And then Drew Thelwell, coming from Morehead State, who Indiana fans will be somewhat familiar with, as Morehead State played Indiana last season. But he's the winningest player in Morehead State program history. So being able to kind of bring those intangibles, the winning pedigree over, I think it has maybe somewhat quietly been a nice offseason for Iowa and Fran McCaffrey.
So we're going to start with the top Big Ten team in Bart Torvik's rankings entering next season. As of right now, he's got Purdue at number 12 entering next season. Now, obviously, Purdue just went to the national championship game, but they lose Zach Edey. Just had a bit of a surprising departure with Kanan Catchings, seemingly arriving on campus and then leaving to transfer. Or actually, I don't know if he's a transfer or just released at this point, but he's going to play elsewhere next season. But their scholarships are full for next season. But Tyler, just kind of what's your reaction when you hear Purdue as the top ranked Big Ten team entering next season? Are you buying that? Or are you selling?
This is going to sound like super Indiana bias, but like I'm selling that because when you lose a player like Zach Edey, who was so dominant, who so much of what Purdue did on both ends of the floor centered around, there's just always going to be some level of uncertainty. And I'm just not, I'm not sure exactly what they're going to look like in the post Zach Edey era. Now they have a couple guys that are plus 7 feet. So, is Wilberg and Daniel Jacobson, how quickly are they going to be able to assert themselves? But I do like the fact that, they have Braden Smith, a really experienced point guard who will be able to run the show. Now having led them to the national championship appearance, and Fletcher Lawyer. I think one guy who I would expect to make a really big jump is Miles Colvin. Kind of had a more limited role as a freshman, but he's a guy just really athletic and shoot the ball well. I think he's a guy that makes a major jump as a sophomore and really becomes, a burgeoning star for Purdue. But I would sell that the Torvik ranking. I think they'll be fine. I think they'll be an NCAA tournament team, but I don't see them being kind of at the level that they've been the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I sell the ranking at 12, but I buy Purdue as a team and a program entering next season because of a couple things. I think their guard play obviously is going to remain pretty good. They've got good wings. Their big men obviously going to take a huge step back when you go from the 2-time National Player of the Year to guys that are not as experienced. But the freshman they have coming in has played really well in some off-season events. A lot of buzz for him coming in. I think it's Daniel Jacobson is the guy that a lot of people are talking about. Had some really outstanding reviews written about his play at the some USA basketball events. So I think I agree with you. With Purdue, they're going to be an NCAA tournament team. I do think they could be a team that's, maybe a top 4 or 5 seed in the NCAA tournament, maybe higher if things go right. But to have them 12th right now, that's what, a top 3 seed. I think that's a little bit strong for them, and so it's no Purdue hate. I respect Matt Painter as much as anybody. I think he's done a great job there. I think they're obviously one of the top programs, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country right now. So 12 is a little strong for me, but overall, I would buy Purdue as a team and a program going into next season. Right behind Purdue, though, this is a tough one to figure out. You look at UCLA, they're number 13. It's still weird to be saying UCLA and Big Ten, but here we are. The Pac-12 is officially done. The Big Ten has absorbed UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington for next season. So a lot to adjust to from that standpoint. But UCLA, they were really a disaster last season. Didn't make the NCAA tournament. They had a lot of roster turnover before last year, a lot of guys that didn't work out, but they hit the transfer portal really hard. They've really solidified their roster going into next season. But I can take this one first. I'm still selling them at number 13 because there's still a lot of question marks to figure out when you're bringing in that number of transfers and you're relying on guys that are maybe not as proven in the system and playing for Mick Cronin. He's an awful demanding coach defensively, and I think there's going to be some adjustment period. I think UCLA is another team I look at and say they can be an NCAA tournament team. They could be a team that's 5 or 6 range, but to have them at 13. And I've seen them ranked that high in some of the preseason top 25. So maybe I'm missing something here, Tyler, that you can point out. But I see you shaking your head there a little bit, kind of maybe in agreement with me. But where are you at with UCLA and having them as kind of the second Big Ten team entering the season and number 13 in the country?
No, I'm not agreeing with you at all. I don't know if there's anything that we see eye to eye on. So I'm just messing with you. No, yeah, I do agree. I would sell them at 13. I actually think that they have a pretty high ceiling because I do trust Mick Cronin. And the fact that the teams they had with Johnny Juzang and they have been good in the past with Mick Cronin. So he's a guy that has proven he can win. And I'm looking through the roster and I'm like, we talk about how it's just weird to see these old Pac-12 teams in the Big Ten, and I'm looking through the roster and it's like Sky Clark is on the roster, and it's just like there's just so much to try to wrap your head around here. But I do think that William Kyle, a transfer from South Dakota State, really versatile guy. I think that he can be a real factor for them. I think they can be a good team. I think they could be a 5-6 seed NCAA tournament team, but to have them at 13, I agree with you that seems a little bit high at this moment.
The next team kind of to look at here, number 20, Michigan State. I'm actually gonna maybe go against conventional wisdom and based on kind of last couple of seasons and maybe underperforming. I'm actually going to buy Michigan State at 20. That may be a little bit of surprise to some people, but I think one of these years, Tom Izzo is actually going to figure it out with a team. And, there were some weird dynamics, the past couple of seasons with the Michigan State team. Like last year, I didn't feel like they really had their front court figured out. Maybe the same case going into next year, but this is more of a kind of a bet on Xavier Booker to figure some things out in the front court and them to kind of solidify their center play with Carson Cooper and Kohler. And I know they brought in a transfer. They also have a freshman by the name of Jesse McCullough who probably won't play that much, but they've at least got some size up front and some bodies. And if Fears is healthy next season, I thought Trey Holloman was really good last year as a backup point guard. Jaden Akins, we've been waiting for him to break out the last couple of years. It hasn't really materialized, but he's going to have to take on a bigger role this year. And Frankie Fiddler coming over from Omaha is a guy that can shoot the ball from the perimeter, gives them a wing score. So 20 to me feels fair for Michigan State. Maybe a tad high, but it's not so egregious that I'm going to sell it. What are your thoughts on Michigan State going into next season? And obviously they've had some roster turnover, losing Tyson Walker and Malik Hall, but overall I feel like they do have a solid roster, and you throw in the Izzo factor, I think they've got a chance to be right around where Torvik has them ranked right now.
It's going to be like boring if we're just agreeing on everything, but I do agree with you that I would buy Michigan State stock, and I think that it just feels like how long does Tom Izzo have left to coach? Because it feels like that clock is ticking, and maybe it's more than people think, but it's still kind of at the back end of things. But it just feels like he's going to have at least one more run, right? Like there's going to be one more, magical season, however you want to put it, before he hangs it up. And he seemed, after losing to North Carolina in the NCAA tournament last season, he seemed pretty fiery about wanting to make that happen, about wanting to have another run. And I'm really interested to see how Michigan State's, that freshman class, the jump that they make from freshman to sophomore season, because I think that's going to hold a lot of what their potential looks like. Is, Jeremy Fears, just a really unfortunate situation that his freshman season got cut short, but he was a guy that was really mature as a freshman for Michigan State. And then Xavier Booker and Cohen Carr kind of fell out of the rotation a little bit toward the end of the season, but a really athletic guy. I think those three guys, how they're able to make the jump from freshman to sophomore season, to me, that's going to be an indication of what Michigan State, looks like. But, it feels like, maybe this isn't the shiniest Michigan State team like it was heading into last season, but last season didn't really go as expected. So I agree with you. I do trust Tom Izzo in that sense as well.
Yeah, it seems like with Michigan State, sometimes they're better off when they're being counted out instead of, the team with a ton of expectations. Last year, as you mentioned, they come into the season highly ranked, stumble out of the gate, never really found their footing. Maybe with a little less pressure, and even, a top 20, top 25 ranking is expectations, but it's not the same as what we saw last year with them being a top 5 team or top 7 team going into the season. The expectations maybe just a little bit too lofty. So I'm going to buy Michigan State going next season, and I'm sure when they start out something like 7-5, we're going to be revisiting this and saying what were we thinking. But I agree with you. Izzo's got to have at least one more run in him. And maybe this is his chance to do it. And Booker, coming out of high school, obviously was really highly ranked, didn't play a ton last year, stuck around, I think, when a lot of people thought maybe he'd try the transfer portal. So maybe he does take a huge leap forward and is one of the breakout stars in the Big Ten next season. Coming up next on the list, number 23 is Indiana, which I'm going to... This is a tough one. I'll let you go first, and then you can lead the way on this, and I'm gonna try not to be biased by what you say here, but I'm still kind of on the fence whether on this one, so I do want to hear you out first.
I buy it, but I think that starting out 23 is really reasonable, but I think their ceiling is much higher than that, and I say that because it feels like the guard play is in a much better situation, and this is, barring any unforeseen injuries or stuff like that. But it just seems like the guard play is in such a better space than it was last season, and that's really what the guard play is what's going to unlock Indiana in my eyes. Because you look at when Indiana has had success recently, it's when they've had good guards. Yogi Ferrell, the last major run that Indiana made, and then even when Indiana made the NCAA tournament in Mike Woodson's first season, that's when Xavier Johnson was just playing just at a ridiculously high level toward the end of the season. Then you look at Trace Jackson Davis's senior season, you had Jalen Hood-Schifino playing at a really high level, and he was the game he had again at Mackey against Purdue was just incredible. So, but that was what was really lacking last season, and some of it was not for the fault of their own, of Xavier Johnson just dealing with injuries and having Gabe Cupps, a freshman, thrown in there, but bringing in Miles Rice, bringing in Kanan Carlisle, and then you have Trey Galloway coming back with that. You have Ja'Kai Newton, who, could kind of be a wild card, a guy that has a really high ceiling. Luke Goody coming in as a shooter, who I feel like really can kind of feel like that kind of the Miller Kopp role almost, as a shooter that knows his role, doesn't need to do too much. So that's why I'm buying them, because I just feel like the guard play, at least entering the season, we don't know how it's all going to come together yet because these guys haven't played together. But I just feel like it's in a much better situation than it has been.
Yeah, I would agree with you in terms of buying the ranking. I'm more wait and see on the actual production of the team. And I think that's kind of the sentiment that I've gotten from most IU fans that I've interacted with this offseason. Everyone's excited about the roster retooling, all the new guys coming in, the possibilities for next season, but they're also kind of in a wait and see approach for how the season actually plays out, because there's been some seasons now where Indiana's expectations have been somewhat high and they've failed to meet them. Obviously, the year where TJD and Hood Schifino were on the team, it was a good team, but they didn't even get to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. And so I think that's kind of why you can look at this team on paper and say they've got a chance to win the Big Ten, but they've also got to go out and actually prove it. And I think that's kind of the fair way to look at the Hoosiers going into next season. I think just in terms of talent and roster construction and where they are, 23 feels fair, maybe even a little bit low, depending on some of the early preseason rankings. I've seen them in the high teens, I think as high as 15 or 16. So that's kind of where I'm at with Indiana. The next team on the list, USC 24. I'm just going to go ahead and immediately sell this because we just saw Eric Musselman at Arkansas try to build a roster with transfers completely, and the result wasn't very good last year. Obviously, he's had some really good teams at Arkansas in the past, but he had to lean so heavily into the transfer portal with this team. I just can't see them there's so many factors here. First of all, you've got a new coach, you're a program coming into a new league. You don't know everything that's going to entail in terms of travel. They're going to have to come east so many different times. Those road trips, I think, for a lot of these West Coast teams are going to be difficult. And the fact that you're trying to put a whole new team together of new players. Sure, they've got some talent. They did a really nice job, I think, getting guys from the portal. I think it's a great place to obviously go to school, beautiful campus. And I think in time, Eric Musselman will make this, a top half of the Big Ten. And it's crazy to say top half of the Big Ten. That's top 9 in the Big Ten now with 18 teams. But I just can't see them being a top 25 team going into next year based on all those challenges. I'm selling them at 24.
Well, the thing about Musselman is that he actually has a lot of experience, leaning heavily on the portal. That's basically what he did at Arkansas.
He did it last year though, and it blew up, right?
Right. Yeah, but I mean, they have had good teams there. I would agree though. I mean, I don't have a lot to add to that, other than the fact that maybe it's just me, but it seems like it was just a weird move. It was part of what, the college basketball offseason, just it felt like a lot of shifting pieces from head coaching wise, whether it be John Calipari from Kentucky to Arkansas, Mark Pope from BYU to Kentucky. But I guess I'll move on to Rutgers. And what do you have them at? 30. I feel like Rutgers, I would sell them just because how much they're going to have to be relying on their youth. But I think that they're one of the more intriguing teams because you have two super highly ranked guys coming in, Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, and credit to Steve Pikiell for getting that done. Obviously, Dylan Harper is the younger brother of Ron Harper Jr., so they were ties there. But it's going to be interesting to see what those two young guys do because they're very talented, but at the same time, it's pretty obvious that it's not, the transition to college isn't always going to go super smoothly for these guys. So it's interesting to see how quickly they'll be able to make that transition. I would sell Rutgers at 20, but I just think they're going to be an interesting team to follow with that pair of guys that are really young but really talented as well.
Yeah, I'm selling them at 30. I'm not even I think a lot of the projections are for them to be an NCAA tournament team. I think they should be an NCAA tournament team, but I also have questions just about relying on freshmen right now in college basketball so heavily. And this is a new frontier for Steve Peichel. He's never had really one and done players like this, two of them to coach in one season. So there's going to be a ton of pressure to make those guys the focal point from day one. I don't know if that's like the recipe for building a successful team and program right now in college basketball. We just saw John Calipari basically, I don't want to say flame out because he made the tournament, but he, you know, struggled late in his tenure at Kentucky with relying so heavily on freshmen. And a lot of teams are going to have to recalibrate their approach. And you throw in the fact that they lost Cliff Amore, who would have been a huge, huge piece for them to keep it. If this team had Cliff Amore down in the post and you knew what they were going to have in terms of guarding the post and rebounding and blocking shots, I'm way higher on them. But I just don't see it with the freshmen are going to be fun to watch. I think a lot of nights there's not going to be another game on. You might turn on Rutgers and watch those guys, and they're going to do a lot of fun things and be fun to watch. But man, I just don't know that the formula relying so heavily on freshmen is a good way to go. So I'm going to sell Rutgers at 30. I think they're going to be a tournament team, but not by a healthy amount. And I think they're going to be one of those teams that you look at near the middle of the pack, maybe 9, 10, 11 in the Big Ten, where this has them, I think at 6 is a little bit too high. Kind of moving on to number 34, Michigan. I'm actually selling Michigan at 34 because I think they should be higher. I think Michigan should be higher than 34 going into next season. Couple reasons. I think Dusty May obviously is an excellent coach, had a ton of success at a place that never really had any basketball success at all before he got there. Took them to the Final Four, took them back to the tournament last year. He did a really good job in the transfer portal with the front court, with bringing along Golden from Florida Atlantic. Danny Wolf, I think, is the guy that North Carolina wanted in the front court. He came to Michigan. Some really strong additions in the backcourt and in the wing positions as well, with Trey Donaldson coming over from Auburn, Roddy Gale from Ohio State. He's got a ton of Big Ten experience playing there. Reuben Jones, I believe, is from North Texas. Sam Walters, another front court addition from Alabama. Their roster is just so much better than it was last year. I mean, they've got Namari Burnett coming back. He started most of the games last season. He's going to be coming off the bench as something as like a 7th or 8th man. So I think with just how bad it got last season with Juwan Howard, people are maybe looking at Michigan as a team that's going to take a couple seasons to get going. I think they're going to be better than 34. I saw the face that you made at me there, Tyler. So this might be the one that we're going to disagree on first.
I think it is. And I mean, I think Michigan can. I think that I would probably at this point say they'd be an NCAA tournament team, but maybe fringe. I wouldn't necessarily put them at 34 right now. And I think the conversation would have been different if John L. Davis ended up at Michigan. And obviously the admissions, which really hurt Juwan Howard and how he was dealing with, the roster building there. It would be a different story. But I'm hesitant when you have a new coach coming in with, just a really new roster and trying to rebuild, like we saw with Mike Woodson in Indiana his first season, how difficult it is to come in and just immediately have a high level team when you just have so much that's new. You have a coach that's trying to get his footing, and it just feels like too, it's just with the way stuff ended with Juwan, part of it is just going to be kind of rebuilding the culture there, rebuilding the momentum, the energy around the program. So, I think it might take a little bit of time. I do think that they have potential, but I just would caution people to, maybe not have their expectations too high right off the bat.
Next team, I think we're both going to agree on, so we may float through this one really quick. Northwestern at 37. I'm selling that. Feels way too high. Boo Booey's gone. He was everything to that program. I think actually Chris Collins has done a really good job the last couple of seasons. He made the tournament there. I think it was like 2017, and then they kind of fell off the map, and people wondered if he was going to last. And really, regained his footing, made the tournament the last couple of years. Really done a solid job there. But Brooks Barnheiser's back, Ty Berry's back, Nicholson's back. They've got some other players that are solid. But if you're asking me if they're a top half of the Big Ten team, which is where they would be if they're number 37 in the country based on Bart's early rankings. And again, I want to preface this. This is like not Bart's opinion. Like personally, this is just his computer rankings right now, kind of thrown into the system and where teams are. I think a lot of it's probably still going to change before the season starts. So I do want to caveat that all these discussions are just kind of based on his computer rankings. But quickly going through Northwestern here, Tyler, I'm selling them at 37. I would imagine you're probably in the same boat.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said. Bowie leaving is just massive with how much he meant to that program. But I don't think many people expected Northwestern to do what they did last season. And, I think they were probably picked near the bottom of the Big Ten, and they ended up being one of the better teams, though the league was down, in its entirety. But now you don't have Boo Buie, but I still like the kind of core three that they have, Martinelli, Nicholson, or core four, I guess, Barnheiser and Berry as three guys or four guys that are experienced. It's going to be tough sledding. They're going to have to, it's going to be another heck of a coaching job from Chris Collins if they end up, near the top half of the Big Ten.
Yeah, they'll beat some teams at Welsh Ryan, and there's going to be a couple games next season where you look at the box and you're like, wow, Northwestern won that game, and that's just the kind of team in the program they are. But I'm just not confident picking them in the top half of the Big Ten, kind of based on the current roster. Moving along, we're kind of getting here to the middle of the pack, and kind of go on the downswing here with some of the teams ranked a little bit lower. Ohio State, they're at 38. I would buy that from a talent perspective in the roster, but I am not so sure about Jake Diebler because what do we know about him? He coached down the stretch last year and earned himself a chance to become the permanent head coach. And obviously he's done a pretty nice job in the transfer portal, bringing in, Sean Stewart from Duke, bringing in Aaron Bradshaw from Kentucky. Those are guys that are looked at as cream of the crop coming out of high school as recruits. Bruce Thornton's back as the point guard. They bring in Michi Johnson from South Carolina. They bring in Micah Parrish as a transfer. They got some guys. I think they could get there. I think they could be, 6-7 in the Big Ten when it's all said and done based on talent. But I'm going to sell because I'm not convinced that Jake Diebler as a head coach is proven enough to give me confidence to pick them any higher than this. So I think they should probably be a little bit lower. I mean, the teams that are right below them, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Oregon, do I feel confident that they're going to be for sure better than all those teams? I can't say that I am.
I'm going to sell it because I actually think they're going to be better than 38.
Really?
You look at these four guys that are likely going to be starting, for the five: Bruce Thornton, Michi Johnson, Sean Stewart, and Aaron Bradshaw. I feel like that's as good of a four or close to it as you would have in the Big Ten. Like there's a lot of talent there. In the front court additions, like bringing in Sean Stewart from Duke, bringing in Aaron Bradshaw from Kentucky, those are legit guys. My question with them is, how are those two going to fit together? Because I don't think neither one of them, at least to this point in their careers, have really stretched the floor a ton. I know you probably watch more Kentucky than me, but those, to me, that looks like more two kind of traditional bigs. So I'm curious to see how they fit together. But Bruce Thornton, he was a guy that really came along last season. I think they can be good. My question maybe would be more with the depth of them, like behind those guys, who are going to be the main contributors. I mean, I think Evan Mahaffey, he was a guy that contributed last season, but I think those four guys, I think they're good enough to carry Ohio State.
Yeah, they felt a little bit light at guard depth. Yeah. They've got a couple. They've got a freshman guard, Junie Mobley, coming in, and Tayson Chapman was a really highly ranked kid coming in last year, but didn't play a ton. Like I said, I like the talent. My hesitation is more with the coaching, and I just don't know. And that's not to say I don't think Jake Diebler can do the job. I thought he did a really good job down the stretch last year. I wasn't completely sold on that being the hire. I thought they would go out and hire more of a proven coach. Wisconsin next on the list at 42. Man, they had a rough offseason. They, it was painful. A couple of those, media availabilities where we saw Greg Gard just talking about guys leaving. Not only does Tyler Wall graduate, they lose Chucky Hepburn, who I weirdly saw the other morning down here on the news. He was like doing they had some live TV thing that they were doing on the news here at Planet Fitness. And he was there like, it was clearly like an NIL type thing. And he was like talking about Planet Fitness and going through some like fake exercises. I'm like, well, this is why Chucky Hepburn is at Louisville now, because they're getting him money to go on local TV in the morning to promote Planet Fitness, and they obviously weren't doing that in Madison. He reportedly got a great NIL package to leave Wisconsin. AJ Storr, another one that leaves Wisconsin. I mean, I just, I like John Blackwell, I like Klesmit, I like Stephen Crowell, but I'm just, I don't know. I feel like if Wisconsin doesn't get it together from an NIL perspective and commit more resources to that, it's going to be hard for them to get any higher than middle of the pack at best in the Big Ten. So I'm going to sell them. I think obviously they'll be a team that's a pain to play night in and night out because of just the style of play and how disciplined they are. But man, they lost a lot, and I just can't get there with Wisconsin at this point.
I think the other kind of aspect to look at things from is that I look at Wisconsin similar to Iowa in that they're both football schools. That's where the NIL resources are going. How do they fit into the kind of new Big Ten? Because all of this money, or not all, most of it feels like, is driven by football. How do their basketball programs kind of fit into this kind of just the new way that things are kind of operating in the modern landscape of things with NIL and the transfer portal? My question, I really like John Blackwell, a guy, he was really good as a freshman. You bring in Cameron Hunter, a transfer. They got some decent transfers, John Tanji. I just wonder who the guy is going to be. Like, who are they going to hand the ball to? When things go bad, they need a bucket. Maybe Max Klesmit. I mean, I don't know if he's gonna be that dynamic and that good. He played kind of as a nice role player last season, but you don't have AJ Storr. You don't have Tyler Wall, who, I don't know. It's just the way that their season ended last year. They got to the Big Ten championship game, right? Yeah. So, yeah. But I don't know. It just felt like they should have gone further in the NCAA tournament than they did, and I don't know.
I'm scared if I'm Greg Gard that Blackwell breaks out this year and is like their best player, because what do you think is going to happen if that's the case? He's going to be out of there, and he's going to be the next guy that goes and gets his NIL money somewhere else. And so that's the problem here, because Wisconsin just, it feels like they're more of the resources that they're allocating to NIL and basketball just aren't on par with some of these top programs. And I think it's going to be hard to keep their best players, and they're really in trouble if that continues to happen. I think, they've historically, over a long period of time now, been one of the best 4 or 5 programs in the Big Ten, but with adding these new programs and the NIL piece of it, I think they're really at risk for falling down. I want to quickly move through some of the rest of the teams here as we kind of get to it's not actually the bottom of the league. I mean, we've been through 10 teams. There's 8 left to go. Nebraska,
I feel like we need like a halftime or something. It's
intermission. Let's do like a 15-minute break here and get back to it. But Nebraska is another one that's kind of in the same range, 43. I'll buy that. I think they're a solid team. I think they're bringing back, obviously, Bryce Williams. He was a really good player last year. Obviously losing Tominaga, brought in some transfers. I know Gavin Griffiths from Rutgers is coming in there. Connor Essegian, who's another one. We didn't even talk about Wisconsin. They also lost him. He goes from Wisconsin to Nebraska, and we know how well Fred Hoiberg can do with transfers. I like Nebraska. I'd like him a little bit more if Mast was going to be healthy next season. He's hurt. He's out for the year, but I think they can be maybe a fringe NCAA tournament bubble team, and that's probably where they would be if they were, 43 range. So I'll buy that ranking for the Huskers.
I feel like that's reasonable. I might sell it just the fact that losing Tominaga, losing Rink Mast, guys that were so important, and CJ Wilcher as well, guys that were really important to what them kind of laying, I guess you could say, the foundation to success last season. I don't know if they will be as good as 43, but Mast is the big one because I feel like just his physicality down low, he could also stretch the floor. Losing him next season, I think that's a massive loss. But also on the other hand, like I think Asijan is a really good fit for them. Because we've seen how well that offense is just really good for shooters. We saw how much Tominaga thrived in that. I think he's a guy that if he's given that opportunity, which he wasn't last season at Wisconsin, he could maybe have the season that people did expect him to have last season at Wisconsin.
Up next, Oregon at 47. I'm going to sell that. I think that's too low. They were an NCAA tournament team last year. They're bringing back some solid pieces from last year's team. I think added a transfer. I believe TJ Bamba came over from Villanova. Jackson Shellstead is the point guard that's going to be back. They're getting Nate Biddle back, who's a big man from injury. And I think a lot of Dana Altman as a coach, I think he, as much as we talked about him not getting enough out of Khalil Ware during his time at Oregon, he's made a Final Four there. I think he's a solid coach. They're bringing back some experience from an NCAA tournament team. I think they're going to be in the hunt for another NCAA tournament berth. So I'm going to sell them at 47. Feels a little bit low to me.
I'll sell them, but I actually don't think they're going to be as good as 47. I think, and it seems like the situation with Dante right now is kind of up in the air. Like I
think he's probably not going to be on their team next year.
Okay. Well, I feel like he would obviously swing things drastically in their favor, but they really put it together at the end of last season and made a really nice run at things. I think Dana Altman probably doesn't get as much credit as he deserves. So I guess I'm kind of contradicting myself there. I don't know. It'll be fun just to see these kind of new teams of like how they fit into the Big Ten landscape and like deal with the physicality of stuff. I think UCLA is like really well suited to do that just because of the way that Mick Cronin plays. But it's just, I think it's, naturally there's much more intrigue about the football teams coming in because they elevate the Big Ten in a massive way. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how they all kind of fit into the landscape of the Big Ten basketball as well.
One important note with Oregon is they got rid of that hideous court I
actually didn't hate it. That might be a hot take.
You didn't hate that?
No, I didn't hate it. I don't know. I thought it was unique, and it wasn't like
it was definitely unique, but in a bad way. But
I didn't hate it. I thought there's been worse.
Well, we'll agree to disagree on that. Up next,
I'm buying the court.
Buying the court, selling the
team.
I think that's we should mark that one. I think that's going to be one you're gonna regret in the long. Okay. And I'll give you a break on that one because they're not a traditional Big Ten team, and maybe you don't know as much about them, but I do think Oregon is going to be better than that. The next team, Maryland at 48, which Kevin Willard, he had every opportunity last year to kind of keep some momentum from his first season. He had a ton of guys coming back, bringing back Jameer Young, Scott, and things went terribly last year. And that's a big reason why they're ranked where they are. Obviously, I think they did some relatively nice things in the portal. Jacoby Gillespie coming over from Belmont. He's going to be a nice pickup. They retained Deshaun Harris-Smith, who a lot of people thought might test the transfer portal after was a really rough freshman season. Julian Reese is back. They brought in Derek Queen. Jordan Geronimo is back for one final run in College Park. So, I don't know what to make of Maryland. anyone that follows me on Twitter, or X as they now call it, knows my take on Kevin Willard as a coach. I just don't think he's very good. He, I think, won one NCAA tournament game at Seton Hall. I think he's won maybe one out Maryland his first season there. I'm not buying him as the long-term solution there. Do I think they could be better than 48? Yeah, because I think they've got some talent. So maybe I'm going to sell them and say they're going to be a little bit higher, but I'm not like, in no way am I like excited to watch Maryland next season other than maybe seeing Derek Queen. I think he's got the best hands and feet of any freshman big coming into college basketball. I think he's going to be fun to watch. Good passer. I'm not excited in any way about Julian Reese. He was, I think, a guy we talked about preseason last year. We kind of disagreed on him, and he has some solid numbers, but I just can't get excited about Maryland. So selling the ranking, I think they'll maybe be a couple spots higher than 48, but there's just nothing for me to get excited about right now with Maryland basketball.
I actually think that Queen might open some stuff up for Reese just because he's gonna attract some attention. He does have really good feet, really good touch. I think he'll be a guy that'll come in and make an impact from day one. And then Deshaun Harris-Smith, as a guy that came in pretty highly touted with high expectations, I'm interested to see what type of jump he makes. Is he going to make a significant leap to his sophomore season, or is it going to be kind of more tough sledding? But I think he's a guy that could really be an X factor for what they look like. I would say I would I guess buy them at 48. I feel like that's probably reasonable. I look at them as at this point as probably like as a bubble team.
Yeah, I mean the thing with them is, did they have any shooting? Like, look at their team.
That was the issue last season too. They could not hit water if they fell out of a boat. So
they brought in a transfer, Selton Miguel. He's, I think, expected to be a decent 3-point shooter. Rodney Rice is another guy who was like a top 75 kid coming out of high school from that area. Played at Virginia Tech. I think he's a guy that could potentially fill that role, but I just don't. I mean, if they're just going to run back the same thing next year with Gillespie playing the role of Jameer Young and surround it with guys that can't shoot, I don't see how the results are going to be all that different. So we'll see. But like I said, I'm just not excited by the future of Maryland basketball with Kevin Willard. I think they can do better long term. Washington next on the list, probably the team that both of us know the least about on this list. I mean, who watched Washington basketball the last couple of years under Mike Hopkins? It was pretty much a train wreck of a program. Maybe that's a little exaggeration, but they weren't relevant, and that's why he's no longer the coach there. They bring over Danny Sprinkle, who did a really good job at his previous stops, made the tournament the last couple of seasons. Another team that it's just hard to get a feel for with how much they brought in. I mean, they bring in 8 transfers. They do have a really highly touted freshman by the name of Zoom Diallo, who they were able to retain, top 40 kid. Their front court play seems unproven to me. Obviously, bringing in great Osabar, who reportedly got a $2 million NIL package. They spent a lot of money on him, so they're expecting big things there. But I think they're going to struggle in their first year in the Big Ten, and it's not to say that they won't be a tough team on some nights. They do have some talent, but I think 51 feels just about right. I'll buy that for Washington in year one of acclimating themselves to a new league and also dealing with a new head coach.
I do like Danny Sprinkle a lot, as having had a great success at Utah State. I think that long term that's going to be a good fit, and he'll be able to make some noise there. But year one, I would sell that. I don't think they're going to be as good as 51. I don't think they'll make the NCAA tournament. You also have to take into consideration, on top of the fact of just a new coach, new roster, all that type of stuff, they lose Keon Brooks and Xavier Wheeler, who are 2 transfers from Kentucky that were important to what they did, even though they weren't great last season. But I guess I would, in the short term, sell, long term buy.
Last 4 teams to go here, which Illinois at 53 seems, I'm selling that. To me, that's too low for Illinois. Brad Underwood to me is, I don't know if I'm looking at coaches that I'd want to have right now in the Big Ten. Obviously, Painter's got to be at the top. Izzo's up there. Brad Underwood's in the conversation for me. He just went to the Elite Eight. He's been a very good coach for the last several years. I don't love Trey White being a big part of their team next year on the wing, but they did some nice things, bringing in Kylan Boswell from Arizona from the transfer portal. Ty Rogers is back. They've got a freshman guard who I'm not even going to attempt to say his name, but is expected to be one of the top international players coming to college this season. In their backcourt, he'll be a big addition there. I'm optimistic that Illinois is going to be a tournament team. Are they going to be as good as they were last year? No, but they've got Brad Underwood. They've got talent. I think he'll figure it out. So 53 to me just seems ridiculously low for Illinois.
I agree. I think they'll be better than 53. I think they'll be a tournament team. But like, I mean, just how much they're losing when you talk about Dane Danjagon, Terrence Shannon Jr., Coleman Hawkins, Luke Goody coming to Indiana. It's just
the
a
mask,
lot of
Marcus.
The mask, yeah. So much of what made them good last season is gone. The one player I actually do think is really interesting is Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, and that's for people in Indiana might be kind of a familiar name because he went to, or early in his high school career, he went to McCutcheon, same high school as Rob Finney, but he's a young guy, talented, just didn't play a lot last season because of how good the roster was, but he's a guy I think could make a pretty significant leap, this coming season. So they will be interesting to see how this is going to be a real test for Brad Underwood to see how he can figure things out after everything they lost and the success that they had last season.
Final three teams on the list. We finally get to the team that Tyler covers, the Iowa Hawkeyes at 55, which I don't know what to make. You've got a better sense of Iowa than me. You probably have to sell this because if the Iowa fans listen to this podcast and they've made it through almost an hour now, and they're waiting for this part, Tyler. They're waiting for you to sell and tell them that Iowa is going back to the NCAA tournament last year, that they're not the third worst team in the Big Ten. Actually, if they were the third worst team in the Big Ten, they wouldn't even make the Big Ten tournament next season because the Big Ten tournament is only going to have 15 teams. So right now, based on Bart Torvik's rankings, he does not have Iowa as one of the top 15 teams in the Big Ten next year. What say you on the Iowa Hawkeyes?
I know that you're not too optimistic about them, right? Probably. Am I correct in saying that?
I think they've hit their ceiling under Fran McCaffrey. I think they've hit their ceiling. He's been there long enough. They've never been to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. I don't know. I can't feel excited about something how long has he been there? Like 15 years?
I from a big picture perspective, I don't totally disagree. But like if we're just talking about this team, I think having them third to last in the Big Ten is ridiculous because
I would agree. I think that's fair.
Like that's actually insane because their core three guys. This is the three. If you're going into the season saying that whose Iowa's big three, Peyton Sandfort, who is going to come into the year as one of the best players in the Big Ten. Owen Freeman, co-Big Ten Freshman of the Year last season. And Josh Dix, a guy who I think is severely underrated in the Big Ten and really nationally, he probably doesn't get as much attention as he should. That's a really good three to start off with. And then you add in the fact that they have some younger guys who got experience last season, Brock Harding, Bryce Sandfort, Laji Dembele. I think I like all of their ceilings. Then you bring in Seydou Traore, who, like I said, has, I think, some real defensive value, had a really good freshman season at Manhattan. And then Drew Thelwell, a guy that's experienced, who has winning experience. I think I was a dark horse in the Big Ten. And I don't know, I'm not necessarily saying a dark horse to win the Big Ten, but a dark horse to make noise, to finish in the top half of the Big Ten, a dark horse to surprise people. And some of that, you need those big three to be the big three. But like, I think Freeman is a guy that, I mean, he can be one of the best big men in the Big Ten outright if he makes a jump from what he did as a freshman to sophomore. So I think having them, like, it's crazy to say now, well, did you make the tournament? Or are you talking about the Big Ten tournament or the NCAA tournament now? Like, that just, it's the weird concept to wrap your mind around. But like, to have them that low, I think is crazy. So I think, their ceiling, I really like, and maybe this is just because I cover the team and I'm kind of around them more, and I feel like you probably have a certain level of bias in that sense. But there's some momentum that they've built this offseason, and I think that they have a legit shot of surprising people this season.
I think they should be at least ahead of Washington. After that, I mean, there's arguments on some of the other teams. The problem is you just look at all these teams and they all have some question marks, and as does Iowa. You mentioned kind of me like not being enthused about Iowa. It's more of just kind of looking at the long tenure now of Fran McCaffrey, and there's a pattern of they have a great offense. They don't really guard anybody on a consistent basis, and then not making the second weekend of the tournament over this period, like hoping for that to happen at this point, it's a pretty big leap of faith. And so I do agree with you. They're going to be fun to watch from an offensive perspective. I'd probably feel a little bit better about him if Tony Perkins was still on the team, but this is kind of going back to the same thing we talked about with Wisconsin. He left for a payday. They weren't going to be able to keep him, and he moves on to Missouri, who was a team that was absolutely terrible last year, didn't win a single SEC tournament or SEC conference game. He leaves to go there, clearly to get his NIL money. Props to him for that. It's his last chance to cash out. So a good decision there from a monetary perspective. But Iowa, to me, they'll be lucky to make the NCAA tournament next season. They've got a chance, I think, to get there, but I'm not excited about the future under Fran McCaffrey. And if they don't step up the NIL resources, I don't know what their ceiling even is in the Big Ten. So probably a couple spots too low, but I'm not as excited as Tyler is. And Iowa fans, if you're upset, send any negative messages to Tyler, and he can filter them before they reach me. So moving on to the final two teams on the list, which I think these are the two teams that you would say, which maybe they should be flip-flopped. Minnesota at 69, Penn State at 78. Who knows if that's where they're going to be ranked? I'm not even going to buy or sell. I'm just going to give you a couple thoughts on each program. You can do that, and we will close the show. Minnesota up first. I actually feel a little bit bad for Ben Johnson, because I thought Ben Johnson last year did a relatively good job, with the exception of the ridiculous non-conference schedule that they played to pad their win totals. They were actually a competitive team in the Big Ten. They had some solid wins. They were, tough to beat at the barn. They had some nice wins. So, I mean, it felt like a team that was potentially heading in the right direction. And then the offseason hit, and Cam Christie went to the NBA. Elijah Hawkins transferred to Texas Tech. Pharrell Payne, I think, transferred to Texas A&M. Not sure if they lost anyone else that was all that relevant, but they did lose a couple of other transfers. And I don't know what really the future holds for Minnesota basketball. And it's not a Ben Johnson thing. It's more of a, how are they going to get players? How are they going to retain players? To me, they're an even bigger, they're an even bigger example than Iowa and Wisconsin of a school that, unless they really commit themselves from the NIL perspective, is going to have trouble staying relevant in the Big Ten. What thoughts quickly on Minnesota, Tyler, before we move on to Penn State?
They have Dawson Garcia, I guess, still. Is that like
but do you agree with what I'm saying? Like, I don't know, like, what's Ben Johnson supposed to do if they don't have the NIL? What are you supposed to just go grab guys from, like, he grabbed a guy from a lower level last year in Elijah Hawkins. He was one of the better point guards in the Big Ten. He had a really good year, and then he left. So
yeah, I mean, no, I agree. And it's a tough spot, and that's where you kind of like wonder where NIL is like. Is it going to become revenue sharing? Like that would
Yeah.
probably help a team like Minnesota. Like at this moment in time, it's tough for them to compete. And I actually give him credit for landing a guy like Cam Christie in the first place, like to
Right.
be able to get that high level of guy to come. But then it's just like it's even more difficult to hold on to him for more than a season. So that
Right. If he wasn't going to the NBA, he'd be leaving via the portal. So
right. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't really have anything else to add to that.
Penn State up last. They've I think they've got like their top 4 or 5 players back from last year. They weren't terrible last year. I mean, they on a given night could beat some teams. I thought Mike Rhodes brought a little energy in there. Obviously, it was a step down in terms of what they were like to watch from Shrewsbury, who just came in there and shot threes and was exciting to watch. And it was more of kind of a rock fight with Penn State last year. But I like Ace Baldwin. I like Kern. Some of the other guys. They got a guy named Zach Hicks, I think, that made some threes. I mean, if you're asking me today, are they one of the bottom 3 teams in the Big Ten? Probably Penn State. But they're kind of another team that I feel like is gonna. They're definitely putting their NIL towards football there.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's going to have to be a huge player development program and retaining guys and winning with older guys. I think over the long term, they did have a strong freshman class. I think by their standards coming in this year. Hopefully, some of those guys, for their sake, can stick around and develop over a long period of time. Tyler, anything on the Nittany Lions before we wrap up?
I don't like their ceiling as much as Iowa, but I think they're another team that like people are kind of sleeping on a little bit because they were pretty competitive last season in Mike Rhodes' first season, and like you bring back Ace Baldwin, who's probably going to be one of the better guards in the Big Ten. And then what they're able to do defensively, like they mix things up with the press that they would put on people. And then DeMarco Dunn coming back, Puff Johnson, they were both contributors last season, both former North Carolina guys. I mean, I don't think that Penn State is going to make the NCAA tournament, but I think they're going to be much better than last in the Big Ten. So they'll still probably be bottom half, but I think their ceiling is higher than 78.
So my conclusion from this podcast is there's like 17 Big Ten teams that we think could be relatively good, that's actually not going to be the case. There's going to be some of these teams that fall flat, but it's just interesting to look at, I think, the Big Ten from top to bottom right now. And there's not a dominant team at the top like there was with Purdue last year. There's a lot of teams that you look at and say can probably solidly make the NCAA tournament. And there's a lot of teams that you look at and say, if things go right, they could be a bubble team. And I think with the exception of, I don't know what to make of Washington because I don't know enough about them. I haven't watched them enough, and they've got too many new pieces. And Minnesota, I think everyone else is going to be on a given night capable of beating anybody in the Big Ten, particularly in a year where you've got things where you don't have a dominant power like Purdue. Tyler, as we sit here in the middle of June with Big Ten hoops a long way away, just what are your thoughts on the overall quality of the league as it stands today, leading into next season, and what's going to be like to watch a Big Ten with 18 teams next year in a 20-game schedule?
I'm excited for it, and I mean, I'm guessing a lot of Indiana fans feel that way. Like, I'm just excited for college basketball to be back. The NBA is kind of winding down a little bit, but I will say this from an Indiana perspective of things. We've talked about, well, how are these certain programs going to adjust to the NIL and the portal and all this type of stuff? I think Indiana, with the exception of a few schools, and this is nationally speaking, they're almost as well situated as anyone else. Like I think you could probably make, Kansas might be a little bit better, UConn. But if I'm a recruit in the portal, like there's not a lot of places that I'd rather go than Indiana because one, the fan base. Like if you have to probably assume if you're playing college basketball, you at least like that. Like you at least like basketball. You probably love it. The fan base is so passionate that you want to go to a place that is really going to care about basketball. And then the fact that Indiana, they have deep pockets. They're willing to spend money in the portal. They're able to put resources to it. You are, as much as possible as a college basketball player, going to be treated like royalty when you're there. There's good facilities. I just look at Indiana in this space as like they can really thrive in this environment. They have the history as well. And I think that we really saw this come to fruition this offseason, with the guys that they were able to get with Omar Ballo, Miles Rice, Kane, and Carlisle. And some of this was they just had to because there were so many roster spots open. But I really think you saw how Indiana is able to thrive in this type of climate. You really saw that come to fruition. And I think it's honestly good for a program like Indiana to have a climate like this, because you look at the disappointment of last season and it's no longer like, well, it was a bad season and now you're going to have to wait 3 to 4 years to kind of let that experience really become the wins and hope to develop. No, it's like a win now. I think that benefits Indiana because you can go get guys that want to win now, that have the ability to win now. And when you're talking about trying to chase another national title, like Indiana's in a spot where they could be bad last season and they could be really good the next season. So I just think that from an Indiana perspective, like this kind of new landscape of things is actually pretty beneficial to them.
Well, Tyler, thanks for taking the time to go through the entire Big Ten. I don't know if you can find any other podcast in the world right now that's going through the Big Ten in June, team by team, breaking it down. But Tyler, thank you for taking the time to do that with us. Thanks everybody for listening to Podcast on the Brink. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating or a review over on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating over on Spotify. And we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.